Looking at the last week, something has felt a bit off, which is kind of the new normal. I was watching a press conference in the US, leadership talking about the newly renamed Trump Kennedy Center, about the disaster that it is, about how marble floors were the solution, alongside Iran excursions or war seemingly interchange the mean to the same thing. And flipping through TikTok, I saw at the same time there was a tornado warning in Washington, D.C. Those two things were happening at once, no mention of either inside the other. America's leaders sitting around a table discussing marble floors, government officials that were close to death, and Iran oil excursions. While in another reality, meteorologists were warning about tornadoes in the same city at the same time. And I couldn't place that. Not because it was a small disconnect, but because it wasn't. And that's the third layer. And then there's the third layer. I'm hearing that the war is over or ending soon, that we won as Americans, while at the same time, I'm watching escalation, retaliation, and nothing that resembles a conclusion from my perspective. So now it's not just confusion, there's three different realities being presented at the same time. And I've been sitting with something underneath all of it. Not just what's happening, but how we got the power to be in so many places at once, to decide what happens at all. How does America get to decide who leads another country? How does our dollar back natural resources sitting in soil that we don't own? I grew up inside that power. I never questioned it. It just was. And I think that's part of what this episode is really about for me. Realizing how much of my idea of normal was inherited, not examined. It's that fear of questioning that had been placed inside of me since before I can remember. And I'm not sure when questioning became okay or acceptable, uh, if not necessary for me, but it has. And once I've started pulling on that thread, it's something that I can't stop. So today, I want to talk about something most Americans have heard of, but probably never had it explained to them. Not because it was hidden exactly, but because when you live inside a system, you don't usually need to understand how it was built. You just feel it working. Or maybe you feel that it's bigger than you can explain. So you just live inside of it because it's all you've ever known. Or maybe you feel it's not working the way it used to, whether you have a name for it or not. So today I want to tell a story of the petrodollar, and I want to be honest with you. Saying this out loud feels a little scary and strangely a little exciting at the same time. To understand the petrodollar, you have to go back one step further to 1971. And to be honest, I'm starting to wonder who needs television with American history moving the way that it is. Before that year, the dollar was a promise, a redeemable promise. After years of World War II decimation of many other major currencies and countries, the US was left pretty untouched. Its people, workforce, factories were largely untouched. So it offered a stability that wasn't seen anywhere else at the time. If you were a foreign government holding American dollars, you could walk up to the United States and say, "I'd like my gold, please." The dollar was backed by something you could actually touch, a system decades in the making. And then, on a random Sunday night in August 1971, President Nixon went on television and ended that. No major warnings, no negotiations, not a conversation with the countries holding billions in American dollars. Just a simple announcement. Overnight, every nation holding dollars went from holding a redeemable promise to holding just a promise, backed by trust, backed by the fact that America was powerful enough that you had no choice but to keep trusting it. This moment makes me scratch my head just a bit. If the promise were no longer connected to gold, what happens to all the gold that was supposed to be connected to the promise? And also, the part that makes me want a little popcorn, if I'm honest, too. Because the gold didn't vanish, it consolidated. The promise ended, but the gold stayed in American vaults. The people closest to power kept the hard asset. Everyone else was left holding paper whose value was now decided by the people who held the gold. And that immediately created a question. Okay, but why should the world keep accepting that? And then a man named Henry Kissinger had an answer. Kissinger was America's Secretary of State, a man who has been said to have operated purely on power and leverage. Not ideology, not morality, just what moves the world. And what he understood was this: every nation needs energy. Every economy runs on oil. If you require dollars to buy oil, every nation on earth needs dollars. So, in 1974, 3 years after Nixon ended the gold standard, Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia. And the offer was very specific. America would protect Saudi regime, military support, weapons, stability. Your government stays standing. In return, all oil sales globally priced in dollars. And the surplus dollars Saudi Arabia accumulated invested back into American debt. And Saudi Arabia didn't come alone. They actually brought other major oil producing nations with them. And just like that, the dollar wasn't backed by one country's oil. It was backed by the world's. And countries holding billions in dollars needed somewhere stable to put them. The most logical place was American government bonds or American debt. So, the world wasn't just using our currency. They were funding our government, funding the military that protected the system, that forced them to use our currency in the first place. It was a loop, elegant and total. I want you to sit with what that actually means. The strength I grew up feeling as an American, I always thought that it was just natural. Like, of course we're strong. Of course the dollar works. But the more I started looking into how this actually functions, I realized something a little uncomfortable. That strength wasn't just America being great. It was an agreement. And I think that's part of what unsettles me about this. Something that I thought was just natural strength may have actually been engineered dependence, made in a room in 1974, that most Americans never knew existed. I never knew existed. The power is real, but it was always built behind something. And that's the question I keep coming back to. Is the power still real? Or is it built behind something that was always temporary? Because here's what I started noticing when I pulled the thread. The agreement with Saudi Arabia that built this entire system, it expired in June 2024, quietly. No press conference, no headline. Saudi Arabia just chose not to renew it. And that wasn't the only thing that was moving quietly. What started becoming visible around 2022 was a slow drift. Oil producing nations, including Russia, Iran, Venezuela, even Saudi Arabia itself, beginning to settle trades outside the US dollar. Not all at once, not with an announcement, just practical decisions being made by people building options that they didn't have before. And it's worth understanding what accelerated that. When America placed sanctions on Russia in 2022, the intention was to protect a sovereign nation, to defend the dollar system, and restrict the shift that was already quietly happening. But what it showed every other oil producing nation was exactly how exposed they were, how quickly access to the dollar system could be turned off. And the countries that stood alongside America, that disrupted their own energy supply, that took real economic pain to honor a principle, they're also watching now, questioning if the ticket price is worth the entry. Watching Cuba, watching Greenland, watching Venezuela, watching Iran, watching as many could interpret the rule maker imposing rules that may not apply to them in the same order. And I want to be extremely cautious here. I'm not saying America fits into this box or that one, or that there is only one way of seeing this. Perspective is one of those weird things that looks different depending on where you're standing. The behavior and the justification used to arrive together, separated by news cycles, or the justification arrived first. Now, they arrive simultaneously. And the gap between what's being said and what's being done is harder to close when everyone can see both at the same time. That may shift. It often does. A different voice at the podium can change the tone, the approach, even the relationships. But the feeling underneath doesn't reset as easily as the messaging does. And that's what I keep coming back to. And people, like countries, when they feel that they are exposed, they don't announce that they're leaving. They just quietly start building exits. The Strait of Hormuz, Iranian oil moving in Chinese yuan, Saudi Arabia transacting with China in a currency that isn't dollars for the first time in 50 years. Not as a threat, not a warning, just a pattern already in motion before most people even know where to look. And as I watch African nations starting to stand in their own power, I watch the EU quietly saying, if we don't build our own financial structure, we will be absorbed into someone else's. I watch China offering something I think America may have stopped offering. It's a stance of, we don't need you to become us, just work beside us. And I think about a strategy that was described before this administration took office in the US. It was flood the zone. Create enough noise, enough contradictions, enough simultaneous crises that attention becomes a scarcity. And it works. Domestically, it really works. But the Saudi government isn't exhausted by American news cycles. African nations making 20-year infrastructure decisions aren't watching the marble floors press conference. They're watching behavior. And behavior is much harder to flood. So while the zone gets flooded at home, while we're managing the noise, trying to figure out what's true, which crisis to look at, the architecture underneath is quietly shifting. The agreement has expired. The oil is moving. The alliances that took decades to build are being tested in ways that don't just reset when the moment passes. And I keep coming back to something else I can't quite shake. There is a new conversation that is happening around stablecoins, about America being the king of crypto, about dollar-backed digital currency becoming the new infrastructure that all value moves on top of. And part of me wonders, is this the move? Not oil as the thing every nation needs, but value, transfers itself. The rails that money moves on, built on dollar-denominated stablecoins. I think this is a real possibility. But here's what else I also see. China is building its own. The EU is building its own. African nations are asking, why will we build on rails that someone else owns again? Because history has a way of teaching people more than agreements can. And for the first time in nearly 100 years, there may be off-ramps forming that have never existed before. And in my opinion, the people that are most willing to take those off-ramps are the ones with the most recent memory of what accepting Western financial dominance actually cost them in the first place. And that's where something like RLUSD, Ripple's stablecoin, and XRP keeps pulling at me. Not as an answer, not as the one thing that fixes this, but as more of a question being asked inside the system. How does the dollar enter an ever-evolving digital economy and hold its power? And what if value moved on neutral rails, not dollar rails, not yuan rails, just bridges between currencies, between systems, belonging to no single nation. RLUSD is dollar backed. It's Ripple's product, but it lives inside the dollar system. It's the bridge between crypto and traditional dollar finance. XRP is not backed by dollars, not backed by gold, commodities, or any government. It's not a stablecoin. It is a bridge between everything else. Currencies, systems, nations, without owing allegiance to any of them. And who knows, to be honest, if this is a genius move, opening doorways for people all around the world, or if America will overshadow the use case. Time will tell. I don't know if that's what is happening next, because nobody has a roadmap. And this is where I think I have to pause for a second. If you haven't seen the previous episode that I did, I invite you to start there, because this journey started somewhere I did not expect, and it changes how this lands. But before you go, if you're here, stay, because where we're going next connects everything. The Roman who went back to the land when the coin stopped working, he wasn't watching a collapse. He was living inside a change that he couldn't fully see yet. The German lawyer making fateful payments for 20 years. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was trusting a system that eventually stopped being trustworthy. And this was before anyone announced it. And maybe that's what this moment is. Not a collapse, but a shift. The weight moving, the agreements changing. What felt permanent turning out to have always been temporary. Not because it was weak, but because everything is temporary. And I keep coming back to one thought that I cannot shake loose. Was the petrodollar built on American greatness or American power? The answer to that question changes quite a bit. They create a different place to stand. And what happens when you start drifting so high in the air that you forget you need something to stand on? Because there's no way to be everywhere all at once. And when someone is screaming, other people are still working, still talking, still reordering, still listening. It even sneaks across the TV screen from time to time, if you know what you're looking at. And it's hard to argue with what's happening elsewhere when you were already busy arguing before. And I haven't even mentioned the airports in the US, or ICE, or what's happening domestically while all of this is moving internationally. Because that's the thing about everywhere all at once. You can't actually cover everywhere at once, and neither can anyone else. I don't know how to wrap this up cleanly. That's not me being evasive. It's just honest. Because I don't think this wraps up cleanly. What happens when years of power, too big to question, meet moments where the questioning itself undoes sanctions. I don't have the answer to that, but I think we're watching it happen in real time. That's where I am this week. Not with answers, not with a roadmap, just watching the pattern, sitting inside the shift, and bringing you along with me. I'm James Harris. This is Layer 1. Thank you for joining me for another episode. And until the next one, I will see you later. Have a great week.